overcome some of those obstacles. And Kenneth, I think given your experience in helping customers to actually adopt this kind of strategy, would be great to start with you. We've touched on some of the challenges, but what would you say are some of the best ways or best practices to overcome some of those hurdles and be able to implement things like a part performance dashboard? Any best practice you can share, lessons learned?
Yeah, no, thanks, Margaret. Yeah, no, super question. And yeah, I suppose the way we do this, Margaret, is it's a very collaborative approach because every vendor is different. So we've pretty much productized the concept of a partner performance dashboard or a KPIs dashboard or metrics. Different people call it different things. Some customers call it their partner competitive dashboard and so on and so forth. So I suppose the first thing we do is we sit down with the vendor, and we very much, as some of the panel are on here will know, it's very much a partnership approach. We don't see ourselves as a vendor supplier relationship. It's all about working together and figuring out what are the KPIs. So that's literally the first place we always start, is what are the KPIs that are important to your business and important to your channel, and we'll sanitize those. And some of them are very obvious: revenue, pipeline, incentivization. But then depending on the business, it starts to get a little more broad and varied. I mentioned earlier, is it partner led or partner source business versus vendor led? If they're a SaaS organization, then they'll be interested in things like renewal rates and adoption. If there's somebody that's transitioning from on-premise to cloud, they'll want to measure how many have we moved, etc. So the very first thing is sitting down, working with that vendor, showing them real life use cases and say, okay, how does that resonate with your business? And then validating those KPIs, right? And you don't have to boil the ocean, as I always say. It's always a crawl, walk, run. You might say, I want to start with 3 or 4. Generally speaking, I would tell people anything more than 8 is too many. You just don't want to start to confuse the partners. And we generally see the most successful ones are around 6. And then keeping in mind on any of these KPIs that you define, you can drill down layers into them. The second step then is, once the KPIs are agreed, we will always ask the vendor, okay, can you take those KPIs, validate them with your overall business's goals? Because sometimes you get a little siloed, and what that department might think are the right KPIs might not necessarily align with their business or strategic goals, and sometimes you find a little blip there. So you always want to be successful, you always ultimately need to roll back up to the C-level objectives. So we often find there people get a little disjointed, and not intentionally. It's just busy, right? And people lose focus. So once you know that's, believe it or not, that is the hardest part of the job, because that's making people really put them through their paces to really think very carefully, what do I want to measure? Because now you're reverse engineering what you're going to show to your partners and to your account managers or your channel teams. The second piece, which people always seem to get worried about and think is the hardest piece, isn't the hardest piece, which is, where do I get all the data to drive these dashboards? Maybe if we go back 5+ years ago, yeah, it was a bit harder, but getting data, massaging data, APIs, we take it in every make, shape, and form, honestly. And again, I would say to people, even in the beginning, if you set up your PPD, even if it's driven by files once a week, that's a hell of a lot better than not at all. Okay. And remember, sometimes partners don't want their data refreshed every 5 minutes. They just take a look on a weekly basis, and more importantly, on a quarterly basis. They want to know, how they're doing. So I always say to people, there's 13 weeks in a quarter. If you set me a revenue target of $1 million for the quarter, I need to know every single week how I'm doing against that. It's no good telling me on week 6 or 7 or week 10, I can't recover. It's too late, time has passed. So making sure that you show the KPIs or the data that's driving those KPIs is relatively fresh, as in, I would always say to people, it has to be at least weekly. Great if you can get it to daily, but you don't have to get it daily either. Most partners will only, Don touched on it, they're not that sophisticated, a lot of them. They don't have great systems. You're now helping them do a better job. Always keep that in mind. You're helping the partner, not the other way around. So your job is to help them do their job ultimately and get to the revenue. Okay, so then in terms of getting the data to drive them, that can come in many shapes and forms. And again, you might start with 3 and eventually get to 6. But once it's successful, the conversation gets an awful lot easier, because now you're saying, okay, now I have to go and work with our IT organizations, which a lot of people cower away from. Because they don't want to start a big IT project. And that's why I would often say to people, just start with a file, because remember, these channel teams are trying to do this anyway. They're doing it based on Excel as best they can. So we're literally taking that, but moving it into a better representation of that data and doing different things with that data. If it's successful and you move to the walk or run stage, it's a much easier conversation to say, actually, this is working. You'll have executive support, and getting an API or a feed added from a Snowflake or a Salesforce or an Oracle or an SAP or wherever that data is becomes almost a moot point. It just becomes a project that gets done at that stage. And then as you move into the run phase, now it's working. You'll say, I want to add a different KPI, or different partner types that Don touched to at the very start. I might want to measure my MSPs differently than I do my VARs, than I do my distributors, and the list goes on. So you might have different views of those KPIs, or even different KPIs depending on the persona that's looking at them at a point in time. So yeah, Margaret, that's probably a lot of the finishing point I would say is people sometimes shy away from these and they think they're big. This is going to take like a year to do or something. It's not. We stand these up very quickly, and they make a difference. Generally speaking, these are somewhere between a 4 and an 8 week project from start to finish. So I'll pause there.
Excellent. John, Don, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I'll jump in there because, like Don, probably having done a few of these, if you can set, Kenneth sort of nailed it, if you can set the project parameters, we've rolled out PRMs and partner dashboards in a number of organizations in a very short space of time. The most time I've spent is actually aligning with the business and understanding what are the goals. Do I want SMB business from South Africa? No, we want enterprise business from the UK. So going back all the way to the beginning of the conversation, what are the key metrics you're going to measure? What CRM are you using? So HubSpot, Salesforce, how are the APIs going to look? And getting all that data prepared internally makes the job of rolling these things out, and the obstacles kind of move themselves out of the way because you're so well prepared for it, and the actual rollout times are rapidly reduced, right? So I would say spend some time just aligning with your business, your sales teams, your CS teams, your senior leadership. If they're involved, by the way, there's a key thing here, is obstacles, and I see obstacles in maybe a couple of different ways. Finance rejecting to pay for it is an obstacle. If you can align with the business and you've got your C team, your sales VPs, your CS, customer success VPs, all agreeing that this is a necessary tool to understand what partners are doing for retention or net new or any part of the business. If you've got that buy-in organization-wide, whether you're Juniper or a 200-person or 100-person company, it's super impactful to get the project approved and moving forward.
Yeah, and these are the questions that different stakeholders want to answer, right? And get really frustrated when the channel team can't answer those questions because the data is so complex and diversified. So I think that stakeholder buy-in and it gives a lot of value to them, and being able to articulate that value is really important. Don, I saw you nodding there again. Anything you want to add?
Yeah. I mean, we approach it again as a little bit different. We saw it as this was a great way for us to bring simplification to our partners, that if we did this at each of the different, I'll call it points of engagement with our partners, would take years, right? So, we have a platform to drive our market development funds and our incentives, highly compliant structures built in, processes built in. Compliance in terms of partner tiering is a different platform, right? And how that measures their success and their journeys and those things. Points-based seller rewards, different platform, and changing all of those would have been 18, 24-month project that we would have not been able to move fast enough to deliver what we needed for the hyper growth that we were having. So this was an amazing way for us to put something right there fast, and Kenneth's point, 4 to 6 weeks, that brought all that together. It kept all the greatness that we had out there, all the specificity that we needed in each of those different areas for the experts for that business, but didn't require everybody to pop into these different tools and platforms just to understand the health of the business. Right. And so we did that, and then we closed some gaps where, again, maybe sharing too much, we didn't make it easy for partners to even know their sales, right? We didn't have their sales performance in any of our systems, right? And so this was hey, we're missing, we can bring our MDF, our incentives, our compliance, our deal registration, our points-based rewards, and hey, we have a gap here into a nice, simple, easy way. Right, so it created that first starting point for us to do that, and then we said, okay, how do we got this up there? How do we refine it? Right, so we brought in KPIs. We looked at best of breed performance. We set those baselines and brought those in as KPIs. Now we're looking at how do we pull in things like business planning, right, to bring some more of those elements into it. How do we bring more life cycle elements of, hey, you sold this, you registered this, now you have an opportunity for this. We brought in the ROI elements of MDF, right? So, hey, you've made these investments, you've had this performance, you had this sales. This is then now that ability for us to do all those things. But think about starting in a way that brings, maybe you don't have to change everything. You're able to use this as a cohesion between those things, and then you can optimize and refine for that right experience that you want to be able to have those simple conversations.
I love that, and that's all about being actionable again, right? You're hiding the complexity in many respects, yeah. Right?
But still enhance and bring a longer term strategy together, but you have this as that front end almost to those partners for just that day-to-day experience.
Yeah, and by being able to visualize that and see that, look, funny enough, our compliant partners are also the ones that are top performing, right? You can start to see those.
Yes, the synergy.
That kind of,
yeah,
exactly. If you had to have somebody coming to you saying, we need to do this, where do I start? What would you say is the best way, or things that they should consider as they start to embrace a more data-driven approach, right?